On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 170. More information has been published about Israel's answer to Hamas's hostage demands. According to a report, Israel has offered the release of 700 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 40 Israeli hostages. Expansion of IDF activity in Han Yunis as ground forces have entered the al-Amal region. The operation began with a bombardment of 40 different airstrikes in the neighborhood. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vows to invade Rafah despite more U.S. warnings, stating that Yahya Sinwar will meet the same fate as Haman. UNRWA reported that Israel has banned its food delivery activities in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Internal political turmoil is threatening Israel's government cohesion. This could lead to a reshuffle in the war cabinet and eventually change the entire trajectory of the war. Hello everyone. I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of March 24th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 25th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, more information was published today about Israel's answer to the negotiators that are in Qatar trying to negotiate a hostage deal and a truce in the war. According to a report, Israel has agreed to increase the number of Palestinian prisoners that will be released in the first phase of the deal to 700 Palestinian prisoners that are in Israeli jails in exchange for the 40 Israeli hostages during the first phase of the deal. And Israel is also willing to consider increasing the amount of quote-unquote heavy Palestinian prisoners. These are Palestinian prisoners that are commonly sentenced to life in prison that will be released in this first phase to 100, as long as Israel maintains a veto on the selection of which prisoners will be released. This is a particular point of contention and is likely to be met with rejection by Hamas. Hamas has been insisting on specific prisoners who are very symbolic in the Palestinian population that will be released, such as Marwan Barghouti or Ahmed Sadat. Israel in turn is adamant that they will not be released, and thus that is likely the reason that Israel is suggesting to increase the number of Palestinian heavy prisoners that will be released, but Israel gets to choose who they are. Some of these reports from today contradict what I reported yesterday that was leaked in Al Jazeera about what Israel has proposed in the negotiations. However, the leaks today did still confirm that, like I stated yesterday, Israel has agreed to consider the gradual return of some 2,000 Palestinian civilians per day to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, so long as this begins 2 weeks after the beginning of the truce. This into itself, while it is coming towards Hamas's demands, is still very far from what Hamas demanded. Hamas demanded complete freedom of movement for the over 1 million Palestinians who have been evacuated from the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. So while Israel has quote-unquote climbed down from its tree in the sense that Israel initially said that no one will be allowed to return, then Israel suggested that possibly women and children will be allowed to return. Now Israel is suggesting possibly 2,000 Palestinians a day. It is still very far from Hamas's demand of complete freedom of movement. As I stated yesterday, right now the ball is theoretically in Hamas's court. It is expected to take at least 2 to 3 days for the external leadership of Hamas to get in touch with the internal leadership in the Gaza Strip of Hamas and then see where things lie, where things stand right now. Hamas is supposed to give its answer back to the negotiators. At that point, there may be another summit meeting in Qatar for the negotiating teams to continue. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there was a barrage of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip targeting the southern parts of Israel today. These targeted primarily the areas of Zikim and Chof Ashkelon. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, there's ongoing IDF operation in Al-Shifa Hospital. This is now day 7 of this incursion. The IDF soldiers reportedly took over another building today in the hospital compound, with intensive gun battles and grenades being thrown at them throughout the operation. The IDF reported that 480 Palestinians have been thus far arrested in the compound. I remind everyone that already in day 2 of the invasion of Al-Shifa, the IDF stated that it had arrested some very senior figures in Hamas and possibly the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. However, the IDF stated that it is not reporting who those figures are, so it still remains to be seen what impact this will have on the war and on the different movements in the Gaza Strip. In addition to the Operation Al-Shifa in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, bombings were also reported in the areas of Beit Hanun, and the IDF reported that it attacked a military structure that posed a threat to ground forces in the area. There are also bombings reported in several different parts of the northern Gaza Strip, with ground forces also reportedly engaging in intensive gun battles in the areas of Al-Amal. The IDF, when it started its operation in Al-Shifa, called on all Palestinian civilians that are still in the neighborhood of Rimal to evacuate down south towards the Al-Masri region, so likely the operation in Rimal neighborhood is going to expand in the coming days. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, substantial bombing was reported in the areas of Deir el-Balah, reportedly killing at least 10 Palestinians. There were no reports made by the IDF regarding what was being targeted in that bombing. In addition to this, the IDF did report that it carried out a raid in the central camps, uncovering a drone manufacturing lab during this raid. It was not reported where this was, however, very likely it was in Nuseirat refugee camp. That is where most of the raids right now are being carried out in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. Gun battles were reported in and around this site. This is a picture of some of the drones that the IDF had uncovered during this operation. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, there was substantial expansion of the fighting in different areas of Han Yunis in the last 24 hours. The IDF announced a new operation in the areas of el-Amal neighborhood. This is a neighborhood that the IDF had previously operated in when it first invaded Han Yunis, but not in the last several weeks. This area is located in the western parts of the city, very close to the al-Mawasi refugee camp. The refugee camp actually begins in the outskirts of the neighborhood. The al-Mawasi refugee camp is where most Palestinian internally displaced people are located, in addition to Rafah. This is the main humanitarian area, so it remains to be seen how this fighting may affect this refugee camp. The operation reportedly opened with a large-scale bombing of over 40 airstrikes that were carried out in the area. According to the IDF, these airstrikes targeted military structures, underground tunnels, and other terror infrastructure. IDF ground forces also moved into the region, and other units were seen encircling the area. So this is a common practice that the IDF has been doing, at least in Han Yunis, where it sends different rings to circle the area, usually with armored divisions, and then the fighting continues inside the neighborhood. Within this neighborhood, located is also the el-Amal hospital, which also the IDF had operated in previously several months ago, but not since. Al Jazeera reported today that IDF troops have begun encircling this compound as well. The hospital reportedly has minimal staff and patients that are remaining inside it. Most of them have already evacuated to the al-Mawasi region. Regarding this operation, the IDF spokesperson stated that following intelligence information about Hamas using civilian infrastructure in the area, the IDF has launched this operation, stating that Hamas's use of such civilian and hospital structures endangers civilian lives, and that the IDF will continue fighting in accordance with international law. In addition to this, intensive fighting was also reported in the Al-Qarara region. This is in the eastern parts of Han Yunis. Substantial tank fire was noted in the area throughout the day, and helicopter attacks were also reported targeting weapons warehouses with underground facilities that were also attacked. In addition to this fighting in al-Amal and in Al-Qarara, it was also reported throughout the day that the IDF is again moving towards the Nasser hospital in Han Yunis. The Palestinian Red Crescent reported heavy gun battles in the area. It is very possible that when the IDF spokesperson said that Hamas is using civilian and hospital structures, that was leading up to an operation both in al-Amal hospital and in Nasser hospital. Remains to be seen. Right now, there is IDF activity that is reported deep inside the hospital in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in Al-Shifa hospital, and the Palestinian Red Crescent is reporting activity also in the al-Amal hospital and in Nasser hospital, both in Han Yunis. Meanwhile, in Rafah, an unusual and substantial series of bombing was reported. According to reports, 5 structures and houses were targeted simultaneously throughout the city, resulting in 26 Palestinians who were killed. Again, the IDF did not report what was specifically targeted in these bombings. Very often what happens is the IDF reports only after several days, after it actually substantiates if its target was killed or not killed. Right now, all we know is that these bombings were carried out. These are some pictures that were shown from the bombings in the area. Other news related to the Gaza Strip, specifically there were a lot of statements made today regarding an impending IDF invasion into Rafah, if and when it will happen. France's President Macron stated in an AFP interview today that he is categorically against an IDF operation in Rafah, adding that forcibly uprooting civilians is a war crime. The report also added that in the last conversation between Macron and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, Macron informed him that France intends to call for an immediate ceasefire in the UN Security Council, and that France demands the opening of crossings in the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, the United States Vice President Kamala Harris gave an interview to ABC today. She stated that as far as the U.S. is concerned, I quote, "We have been clear in the multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake. I have studied the maps. There's nowhere for these folks to go," referring to the possible moving of Palestinian civilians from Rafah to somewhere else. She added once again that too many innocent civilians have been killed in the war thus far, and when she was asked will there be consequences for Israel if the country does move forward into Rafah anyway, she did not deny that this is a possibility, instead stating that the United States will take it step by step and one step at a time, but that it has been very clear on whether or not this invasion should happen. In turn, I'll add as a caveat, in Judaism it is currently the holiday of Purim, and today Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu attended a reading of the Megillah, this is a scroll, with IDF soldiers. He stated that Purim marks when over 2,000 years ago an evil anti-Semitic figure in Persia, Haman, tried to exterminate the Jews, but the Jews rose up, united, and achieved complete victory. After he compared that to the Iranian regime today, he added, and I quote, "You cannot defeat ultimate evil when you leave it standing in Rafah. Like in the ancient days, like our brothers then, we are uniting, fighting, and winning. We will invade Rafah and achieve complete victory. We destroyed Haman, and we will destroy Sinwar as well." So as Netanyahu stating that not only does Israel plan to invade Rafah, but that specifically his aim is to manage to capture, or in that comparison, kill the internal leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. Regarding casualties, 1 IDF soldier is reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 252. 7 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,514. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 84 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 32,226. 74,518 Palestinians were reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and I remind everyone that there are still several thousand Palestinians that are reportedly buried under the rubble. All these are presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the head of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini, stated today that Israel informed the UN that it will no longer allow the entrance of UNRWA food convoys to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. He added, quote, "It is outrageous. Israel is stopping life-saving aid from people who are suffering from a man-made starvation." So, as a reminder, exactly a month ago, on February 24th, UNRWA had announced itself the cessation of aid convoys to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, citing both the fact that the IDF is mounting increasing hardship on these convoys and the consistent looting. Since then, the World Food Program began using IDF roads that it had paved in the Gaza Strip on March 12th and started recommencing food deliveries in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. It was not officially reported that UNRWA was reinstating these food convoys. However, there have been more trucks that were entering the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, so likely this happened without a big report. While no report was issued by the IDF confirming the statements of Philip Lazzarini, this does come after yesterday the Gaza Palestinian Communications Ministry accused the IDF of tank fire that killed 19 Palestinian civilians as they were waiting for an aid truck in the Gaza city. The IDF claimed that no such fire was carried out, and that if any incident happened, it was a result of looting that occurred. So it is possible that if this is true, that the IDF has decided, due to these accusations, that it is no longer going to let UNRWA carry out these missions. Again, that does not mean that no aid is going to get to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The IDF has been trying to gradually move over to use different agencies because the IDF wants to phase UNRWA out. So that is why the IDF has partnered with the World Central Kitchen, the World Food Program, and all kinds of different agencies. Nonetheless, it is important to emphasize that UNRWA is by far the largest agency in the Gaza Strip, and the one that can deliver aid throughout the Gaza Strip most effectively. Israel has said that a lot of that aid ends up in Hamas. However, those two things are colliding with each other. On the one hand, the need of Israel as a result of world pressure to allow more aid in. On the other hand, Israel is trying to stop UNRWA from coming in. Thus, we're likely seeing that Israel is saying it is not going to let UNRWA allow more food missions to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, but trying to partner with other agencies. It remains to be seen how this plays out. Related to this, there were reports of aid paradropping missions that were also carried out throughout the day throughout the Gaza Strip, specifically the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. It was not reported specifically which countries carried this out. In the last several days, most of the paradropping missions that were reported were carried out by the United States, Germany, Jordan, Egypt, and Singapore. It is possible it is those same countries, or maybe other countries have also gotten involved. Moving on to the West Bank, the Israeli police published drone footage today of a Palestinian being arrested in the al-Balah village near Ramallah. The Palestinian is reportedly a Hamas operative who had been in Israeli prisons in the past, and he was arrested in this unusual operation since it happened in broad daylight and clandestinely without resistance or confrontations. It was not reported who he was. We may find out more about this in the coming days. Regarding IDF activity, IDF operations were reported throughout a range of places in the West Bank. These include the areas of Beit Furik near Nablus, where confrontations erupted around a Palestinian march in the area, and the Wafa news agency reported that a 14-year-old Palestinian was shot and killed by the IDF. Other IDF activity was also reported in the areas of Kafin near Tulkarem, the areas of Jenin, the town of Silat ad-Dahar, villages of Arana, El-Jalama, Fakura, Jalbun, and Al-Fandakumia. Also, the IDF activity reported in the areas of the Arub refugee camp in Hebron, as well as in Beit Wazan and Nablus. Regarding the activity in Jenin, the Al-Quds brigades of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad reported that its fighters carried out an attack against IDF soldiers in the vicinity of Jenin, so likely it was in one of those operations. It also reported that several IDF injuries were confirmed by the organization. This was not reported specifically by the IDF. In addition to this, there were no reports made by either the IDF or the Palestinian Prisoner Society regarding how many arrests were carried out of Palestinians in the last 24 hours. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were continuous rockets and missiles that were fired from Lebanon, targeting the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. Rockets targeted the areas of Netuah in the western Galilee. There were also anti-tank missiles that were fired towards the areas of Shtula and Reches Ramim. Drone alerts were also sounded throughout the upper Galilee, including the areas of Sde Nehemiah, Amir, Gonin, Kfar Blum, Kfar Saled, Neot Mordechai, and Lahavot HaBashan. Hezbollah also claimed a shooting attack that was carried out in Metula, targeting a house where they stated that they identified movement of IDF soldiers, and another attack that was carried out towards the areas of Menara. Regarding IDF activity, IDF warplanes targeted Hezbollah lookout posts in the areas of Misr Jabel, and attacks were also reported against Hezbollah structures in the village of Bleda. Al-Amal reported that one of the IDF missiles in the Misr Jabal attack failed to explode. In addition, other attacks were also reported in Ita Sha'ab and El-Adaisa, targeting Hezbollah military structures and other Hezbollah infrastructure. These are some of the pictures that the IDF published from these attacks. In addition to this, Al-Miyan reported that IDF drone attacked a car in the town of Al-Sawiri. This is west of the Bekaa Valley, deep in Lebanon, and if this is the case, this comes amidst those attacks that the IDF has been carrying out in the Baalbek and Bekaa Valley region. The Saudi Al-Hadath reported that 2 people with Syrian citizenship were killed in this attack. No statements were made by the IDF, accepting responsibility or reporting who this attack targeted. In addition, Al-Miyan also reported artillery fire in the areas of El-Adaisa. Hezbollah announced that 2 more of its operatives were killed throughout the day. This brings the total number of Hezbollah operatives that the group says were killed since the war began to 246. The IDF states that the number is much higher, well over 300. Regarding Syria, an update from what I reported yesterday. Yesterday I stated that an attack was being reported in the outskirts of Damascus, but no information was given. Today, the opposition radio in Syria, the Voice of the Capital, reported that the IDF attack targeted military outposts in the El-Kalmon region near Damascus. This is an area that the IDF has reported that it targeted in the past. In previous attacks, several Hezbollah operatives were killed throughout these attacks in the El-Kalmon region, so it remains to be seen if that is the same thing that happened in this attack. Regarding some of the regional developments, the United States reported that it attacked 6 Houthi drones that were flying above the Red Sea. 5 of them were reportedly intercepted and crashed, while the 6th one retreated to Houthi territory. In addition, the U.S. reported that 5 Houthi nautical missiles were fired at a Chinese oil tanker sailing under Panama banners in the Red Sea. Minimal damage was reported to the tanker and no casualties were reported. The oil tanker reportedly continued on its course. However, this does come several days after the Houthis announced that they are going to grant safe passage to both Russian and Chinese vessels, so it remains to be seen if this attack was carried out by accident. The Houthis often do not know exactly who they're targeting because it has been suggested by different intelligence agencies that they are basing their intelligence regarding where a ship is sailing or who it belongs to on very old reports. So it's possible the ship used to belong to someone else, or that the Houthis are not living up to their agreement to grant safe passage to Chinese and Russian vessels. Moving on to some of the political and general trends from the last 24 hours. There is substantial internal political turmoil in Israel that is threatening Israel's coalition, which in turn may have a very big impact on the way the war is run. The intricacies of this turmoil relate to the exemption from IDF military service that ultra-Orthodox Jews have in Israel. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has refused to agree to the continuous exemption and extension of this exemption unless the entire coalition comes together and agrees on it. And while the ultra-Orthodox parties in Netanyahu's government insist on this extension and are threatening to overthrow the government if it is not passed, Minister Gantz is adamantly refusing the usual delay tactics that the government implements on this matter, stating that during the war, this cannot continue. This comes amidst the demands of Gideon Sa'ar, who split from Gantz's party, to join the war cabinet that now has a 4-person party, and he says that he will resign from the government if he does not join the war cabinet. While all this is internal politics and may well be resolved through different political deals that are made, many governments have historically in Israel fallen specifically over this issue of the exemption to ultra-Orthodox Jews from military service. If Minister Gantz's party does resign from government, the government could survive. It still would have a majority in the parliament. However, the war cabinet would effectively be dismantled, and the war would return to being run solely by the extremist hawkish government in the expanded cabinet. In turn, it is also possible that if Minister Gantz resigns, Gideon Sa'ar would replace him in the war cabinet, or it is also possible that the ultra-Orthodox parties will leave the government and the government will fall, which will lead to new elections and, for obvious reasons, would have a profound impact on the war. Again, as I stated, it is very possible that all this will be resolved internally within Israel's political system. However, since it may end up having a vast impact on the way the war is being run, I'm also adding it here because we may see the impact of this in the coming days or weeks. The first drafts of the new proposal of extending the law are to be debated this week, specifically scheduled by Netanyahu to coincide when Defense Minister Gallant is abroad. However, again, it remains to be seen if it can actually pass through the government. Related to Defense Minister Gallant's trip, he is currently on his way to the United States for a series of meetings. It was reported today that he is going to meet with the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, the head of the CIA William Barnes, and the Special Envoy to the region Amos Hochstein. In Israel, it was reported that his meetings are going to focus on the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip and the hostage deal, as well as to discuss an Israeli request to purchase advanced F-35 planes and the continued armaments that Israel buys from the United States. In addition, it was reported that the Defense Minister Gallant is going to present an IDF intelligence report to the different U.S. officials, showing that there is no starvation in Gaza, as well as discussing an increase in humanitarian aid. In addition to this, Gallant is also reportedly going to discuss Israel's plans for invading Rafah, while at the same time the United States is being repeatedly stated that the U.S. administration is going to present to Israel alternatives to a Rafah invasion, so likely while Minister Gantz is going to try to come and actually show how Israel is going to invade Rafah and what the plans are, he is going to in turn hear from the United States how Israel is not going to invade Rafah and what are the alternatives. Other political news: South Africa proposed a condemnation of Israel in the Interparliamentary Union. This is an international NGO of national parliaments. The proposal accused Israel of genocide and called for an immediate ceasefire in the war. While 904 delegates out of the just over 1,600 delegates voted in favor, the resolution failed since it requires a two-thirds majority in order to pass. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip. In his meeting with officials in the United States, Israel's Defense Minister Gallant is also supposed to talk about his plans for the day after in the future of the Gaza Strip. Like Minister Gantz in Israel, Defense Minister Gallant's views are much closer to those of the United States. While he is not talking about a future Palestinian state, he is adamant that there needs to be a local Palestinian administration that will govern the region, and he is pushing Israel's government constantly to try to come up with a day-after plan and has been criticizing Israel's government for refusing to discuss this. In this, he's a minority in Israel's government. Israel's government wavers between just avoiding the question and other plans regarding possibly settling the Gaza Strip with Israeli settlements or possibly an active occupation. So again, Minister Gantz and Defense Minister Gallant are much closer to the United States. Minister Gantz visited the United States several weeks ago, and likely Gallant is also going to talk to the United States about how the U.S. can possibly influence the Israeli government more in the direction it would like to see. Contrary to this position, the member of the Knesset Tzvika Fogel, who is a member of the government, he's a member of the Jewish Power Party, stated today in a radio interview to Israel's Reshet Bet, with regard to the future of the Gaza Strip, I quote, "We have to end the war with the entire northern Gaza Strip settled by Jews." Referring to Palestinians, he added, "They will pay the price for October 7th in one simple way. They will not own any more lands there. It will all be ours." When he was asked about world reactions and condemnations that would obviously ensue, he stated, "The world does not care about Jews, so we should care about ourselves. The world likes winners." So again, he's representing the very hawkish side of some of the elements in Israel's government, while Gallant matches more what the U.S. would like to see in the region. So it remains to be seen how all this plays out. If you find these reports important, please do remember to give them a like, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That was my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.